I went into that school being memorable. I was the Arab girl who was obsessed with being Arab and obsessed with her hometown in Dearborn. And that was what people knew me as. And it led to so many opportunities that I never really knew. Like, I didn't think about it that way. What's up, business baddies? I'm Rima, and you are now tuned into the Remix, where being overworked is overrated and simple businesses are sexy. Today, we're going to talk all about business school. I know you probably have a lot of questions as an entrepreneur of what it did to enrich my experience. And I have my notes right here. I have 5 major ways that business school has impacted positively my experience as an entrepreneur. And it is not what you think, okay? So let's get into it. I attended the Ross School of Business in Michigan. I'm a 2-time Wolverine. I talked to a lot of people before making that decision because I wanted to make sure that it was really the best decision. I do not regret it. I am very, very happy that I did it, but it did not impact me as an entrepreneur in the ways that you may think. Here are the 5 main things that being a business school graduate taught me about entrepreneurship. And these are specifically 5 things I am applying day to day in my business. So number 1, less is more. And more can often be less. You might hear me say this a lot, and it's something I truly believe in. And this was something that really helped me in business school. I actually had to learn to practice it as a B school student. And it's because if you walk into business school, there are so many things that you want to do. You're so ambitious. This might be your last educational experience as a student, so you want to maximize it. And I remember vividly being in the winter garden at Ross, which is kind of like the common area, and they did this thing. I don't remember what it was called, but it was where every student group had their table set up and you could really learn about each extracurricular opportunity. Now, guys, let me tell you, okay, I was commuting back and forth from my hometown, Dearborn, Michigan, shout out Dearborn, which is 45 minutes away. We'll get to that in a second. But I was already having to commute every single day to and from school instead of living on campus. On top of that, I started the Dearborn Girl podcast, which is now known as Arabize Media, which was my first business. So I was like a full-time as entrepreneur and a full-time MBA student. Your girl didn't have a lot of time for extracurriculars, okay? So I knew early on I was gonna have to be hyper specific and hyper focused and extremely disciplined about what I spent my time on. So at the beginning of my career at Ross, I remember sitting down and listing the 3 things that were my top priority. Number 1 was my business. Number 2 was ensuring that I walked out with high quality relationships. And number 3, it wasn't academics, by the way. I'm trying to remember what I put exactly for number 3. I get the gist of it, but it was, number 3 was about the extracurricular programs that would help me become a better leader and entrepreneur and speaker. So school was kind of not my main priority. As long as I was passing my classes, I really didn't care. That might not be how a lot of people went through it, but I do know for a fact you could not prioritize everything, especially in that 2 years. So business school, if nothing else, was a boot camp on learning how to say no to things that are not aligned so that I could protect at all costs the 2 to 3 things that I really cared to get out of that experience. That has been my everyday in business. I do not let myself focus on too many things at once. I keep it at 3 max with my business so that I can ensure that I'm achieving a depth of impact versus just trying to be everything, okay? So that was number 1. Number 2 is to be memorable. I was memorable AF as a business school student, and I want to explain what I mean by that. There's a lot of pressure in these corporate environments to basically become a replica of someone else or a template of who someone thinks you should be. And this is not an at, I'm not throwing shade. Genuinely, I empathize with it because I know that being obsessed with everyone's perception of you is honestly part of what B school is about. And in some ways, I was obsessed with it too. I just channeled it differently. And I know for a lot of my classmates, they were recruiting with these big consulting firms. They were recruiting with these banking firms, trying to get into the best tech companies. And their perception and professionalism was something that they cared a lot about. For me, I was an entrepreneur and I wanted to be myself, and I knew that my career trajectory was very non-traditional. So a lot of times I felt very alone in business school. I felt very misunderstood, which was my own stuff to deal with. But I wanted to make sure that I was myself. I just wanted to freaking be myself. I did not, at that point in my life, I did not want anything or anybody to try to make me something else. So I went into that school being memorable. I was the Arab girl who was obsessed with being Arab and obsessed with her hometown in Dearborn. And that was what people knew me as. And it led to so many opportunities that I never really knew. Like, I didn't think about it that way. And the reason that this is super, super relevant to business is this is essentially brand positioning. You have one chance to position yourself in the eyes of your customer as something memorable. You can't be the everything brand. You can't be the brand for everybody because that is not memorable. But you can be the Arab girl who does media stuff for Arabs, or you can be the makeup guru, or you can be the person who specializes in systems, back-end systems, and that's memorable. People are gonna be like, oh yeah, and so guess what? The next time they're in a conversation, and this is true story, it happens to me literally once a week, something like this happens to me, where someone will DM me and be like, hey, there's this opportunity about Arab Americans, or there's this Arab woman that I met, I really wanna meet, I want you to connect with her. Because I was memorable, and anytime something came up that had anything to do with what I was working on and what I was doing, those opportunities started to magnetize. I became magnetic to them because I was not afraid to be specific and memorable. Number 3 is that long-term vision is more important than short-term temptation. I know when I say that out loud, it sounds obvious. It's like, yeah, Rima, like, we know, right? It is really hard to practice that. And it kind of goes back to number 1 of being hyper-focused on what my priorities were walking in. There were so many things I had to sacrifice at business school for the sake of my long-term vision. And I want to tell you what helped me keep focused that way. And I wasn't perfect at all. I definitely had my random nights where I'd sleep over one of my girls' houses. Hey, Leslie, my business bestie. And I would just sleep over her place in Ann Arbor because I stayed up way too late hanging out with friends. I don't regret that at all. But every single moment was a trade-off. And I constantly kept asking myself, like, when I walk across the stage, plot twist, we walked across a virtual stage because COVID hit by the time we were graduating, but whatever. When I walked across the stage, what did I want to be true? Like, what did I want to be able to say about how I spent my time? When I walked across that stage, what did I want to be true about my experience? And you can literally ask yourself that about any milestone. It doesn't have to be graduation. When you think about your business, when this year closes out, or when I am able to do this or get to this milestone in my business, what do I want to be true about how I spent my time? And for me, that led to saying no to a lot of super tempting things, like late nights out with friends, trips that my friends were all going on that I didn't go on. There were like literally MBA orchestrated trips with the school. It was called MTrek. And it was where like people got to bond. And I still have people who I went to school with who are way closer because they got to experience things like that. And so it was absolutely a trade-off. I definitely am not as close to certain people in the school that I maybe could have been closer to had that been my priority. And I stand before you or sit before you today saying that's okay, because business is about trade-offs. Not everything you swipe left on or say no to is going to be something you don't want. Some of those things are things you want. It's just not the right season. And business school taught me to accept that and be intentional about that. Number 4 is a quote that I'm taking from a good friend of mine, Adria Moses, and she is the founder of the School of Radical Healing. She's amazing. Her Twitter game is amazing as well. She always has these really punchy quotes that are literally like poetry. And this quote is, all the rules are fake, do you. That's literally how I felt. I just didn't have the language for it. So in Adria's words, all the rules are fake, do you. And that was literally my business school experience summed up in one sentence. Because the rules were kind of fake. Like, I remember when I talk about why I decided to commute to Dearborn. I remember I had a mentor at the time who worked for Ross, and I was really close with her. I'd actually known her from my undergrad days. And I remember saying, saying that I was going to be commuting, and also mentioning that I wanted to get a part-time job. And I remember her being like, no, like, you're not gonna have time for that. It wasn't just her. All of my classmates that were a year ahead of me in school were like, you shouldn't be commuting, you're not going to do that, you're going to want this experience, you're going to want that experience. And let me just say, I did not ask. It was unsolicited advice. And while I understand it came from a good place, I need you in front of me to know that nobody knows you and what you want and what you need better than you. So the rules are fake. And a lot of times people who love you will try to project onto you the rules that they're following and trying to tell you to follow them, because obviously they're gonna expect you to follow something that they haven't given themselves permission not to follow. And that's just the reality of it. And so business school taught me, now that I'm on the other side, because it was kind of gaslighting me a little bit. Like, I'm like, am I crazy? Am I stupid? Am I gonna fail out of school? Am I not gonna be able to do anything because I'm making this decision that I know in my heart and in my intuition to be true? Am I gonna fail because I wanna commute from Dearborn? Mind you, I wanted to commute from Dearborn because the business that I started was based in Dearborn. I wanted more touch points with my community. I wanted to not be distracted on campus. So it was absolutely the best decision I could have possibly made. But for a second there, the fake rules started getting into my head. And I am so proud of myself and so happy for not allowing other people's fake rules to dictate my life. So in business, a lot of these rules, most of these rules, all of these rules, they are fake. So constantly ask yourself, why is it that I feel the need to only charge this much? Is it because I see someone else doing it and I'm letting them project onto me what I can do? Why is it that I feel the need to go about my business model this way? Is it because that's the only thing I was exposed to? How can I start to create my own rules for myself based on my values, my zone of genius, my unique gifts that are between me and God and no one else needs to understand? Okay. And number 5, this is one transparently that I'm still working on. And it is that relationships matter so much. Because I went in like a hawk, like, I'm doing this, I'm starting my business, I have this purpose. And I will say, my dad had passed away the year before business school. So I walked into business school still very much so in grief. I was carrying this weight that felt like so heavy, especially at the time. And I felt lonely. And I didn't have the words to say that, but I felt like I was pushing people away because I didn't want to be distracted. I felt like I needed to make it count. I had so much that I wanted to do and still want to do, and I really wanted to channel all of that emotion into something meaningful. That year we started a scholarship fund in my dad's name, and that meant so much to me. If I could go back, and while I don't regret anything, if I could go back, I would have prioritized certain relationships a little bit more. And it's not too late. I still have very good friendships coming out of business school, but I think I would have been a little bit less all or nothing about my mission and my relationships and understood how they could better work together. So something that I learned the hard way in business school that I am applying in my business right now is that relationships are extremely important. I do want to go back to the less is more point, because I don't think that I need to be friends with everybody, but there were and are a few key people who I really deeply value and who really enriched my experience in a way that could not have happened had I not prioritized those relationships. And so the final point that B-School taught me about business is really honing in on the right relationships and making an effort to ensure those are reciprocal relationships and ones that you are pouring into, because they will pour in sometimes tenfold. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you want more intricacies on what I experienced in business school and how it relates to my career right now as a serial entrepreneur, definitely comment below. What questions do you have? Are you considering going to business school? Are you in business school as an entrepreneur? I would love to hear from you about what your journey is and whether this is something you're considering, because I am so real, and anybody who is considering going to business school really values my conversation with them, because I will not lie to you. I will not glorify the experience. And yeah, so I would love to know from you, what is it that you are interested in about the business school journey as it relates to entrepreneurship? So thank you so much for watching, and tune in next time.